Hi, Vanessa here. I recently posted on my website why you want a ribber. And you really do if you are using one of the metal style beds where adding a ribber is an option. So what I want to do is I want to do some basic introductory videos on using your ribber so that then we can maybe explore some of the cooler techniques or maybe more advanced techniques that are possible with the ribber, aside from the fact that it does its main function, knitting, ribbing. It does it very well, it does it very quickly. So this would be so we're going to do the singer first, and then probably the brother in a separate video, depending on how much difference there is between the two machines. I don't think there's a lot, maybe just in the way the instructions are listed. So this is the Singer instruction manual for casting on and knitting, and they call this their operation table. So we're going to run through these settings together, and I am going to make sure that I refer to each part by what the manual does, so that if you're struggling along with your manual, then maybe this video will help you out, and vice versa. So along the top we have these symbols that tell us what the settings are for. So the very first one has to do with the punch card reader, because this is a punch card machine. So in the manual they refer to this as the stop knob, and this is the L knob. So if I was doing punch card knitting, the S is just like regular, it changes the settings each row of your punch card. The L, it does each row twice. So it doesn't really matter for this situation because we're only casting on, we're not patterning. So we have this knob set to the circle. So pretty much always your circle is going to mean stop and your triangle means go. Think of the triangle as the play button on a video or on a VCR, and the circle is your stop button. Okay, so next on the manual is the ribber carriage settings. So I'm going to pause, move the camera to the ribber, and then we'll go over those settings. So my mistake, it actually does the knitter carriage first, so apologies. Now for casting on, we really only need to concern ourselves with 3 things, but let's run through them all while we're here. Okay, so this is your side lever, and just like the patterning, you have a triangle, you have a circle. Okay, so for this cast on, we're going to set the side lever to the circle. These are your intarsia levers, which I may be saying right or I may be saying wrong. But anyways, we set those to 1. These are our Russell levers. Unless we're short rowing, those are always going to be set to that double line marking. So the same on this side. Russell levers to the double line marking, the intarsia lever to 1, and the side lever we're going to set to the circle. Okay? We're going to set our stitch selector. So we have slip, stockinette, and these are some other stitches, doesn't matter for now. We want stockinette, so we want our lever set there. Now tension is addressed later, but I'm going to point it out here because we're set up on the carriage. So we want, the book says to set the tension to 0. Pretty much every tutorial I've seen says to set it as low as it will go. Okay? Okay, ribber carriage. So like your knitter carriage, we have Russell levers. Unless we're doing partial knitting or short rowing, we're always going to leave those set to the double line. There's a couple of other things that we don't necessarily use, and one of those is so this is called the pick knob. We're going to leave it on this arrow. Okay? This is the auto set lever, and I think that has something to do with if you're using color changers or something like that. So we leave that on 1. Okay? So now let's talk a little bit about some things that we do change or not. So right now, both of these set levers, set lever left, set lever right, they're set to 1. Now, if we wanted to only knit when the carriage moves to the right, then we would change this to 0, and we will do that later on. If we wanted the ribber to only knit when it goes to the left, then we would change this lever to 0. Okay, so we want those both set to 1 for this cast on. We also want our stitch size to be as small and tight as possible, so we're going past the 0. Okay, so that's most of our settings. What we have left is my book's falling apart. The pile levers and the pitch. So let's see if I can get you in on the pile levers in such a way that you can actually see their effect. Okay, so the pile levers, they're on both sides of the bed, and they're attached to the mechanism that that raises and lowers your ribber. So when it's down, oh, I think mine needs some work. But anyways, you want those both raised, like lifted right now, because that brings the beds closer together. There's a second position that it should go into when I pull that down, where it just drops a little bit, and I think you use that for when you're doing pile knitting. Now this is our half pitch lever, and we want to have it set to P for this cast on because we're alternating our needles. If we were doing a full needle rib, we would set it to H, and then that way the needles would be offset so they wouldn't collide while we're knitting. But because we're using alternating needles, we can put it to P. We're putting it, for our swing position, we're using 5. Okay, so that is all of our settings for now. We're set up to do the first row. We just have to set up our needles now, and then we can start. So before I start setting up the needles, I'm just going to set up my yarn a little bit. So in the instruction book, they tell you to tie the yarn onto one of your clamps. But most of the experienced knitters, machine knitters on their YouTube videos and whatnot, recommend a clothespin instead. So that's all I use, simple wooden clothespin. When it's not in use, it has to go on the mast for the knitting machine, the yarn mast. So I lay the yarn between the 2 sets of gate pegs and blow, and then it goes down to the bottom and you can grab it and pull it through. and then I hang my clothespin from it. And it's just enough weight to keep the yarn from springing up. So now I'm going to move my carriage off to the side and out of the way, and I threaded it. I put the thread in it. So, and the reason why the clothespins have to go on the yarn mast is because if they fall on the floor, then they become splinters because somebody grabs onto them and does them in. So these are my needle pushers. Okay, so you have one that's just a straight edge. This one is a, make sure, okay, so this one is a 1x1, so it pulls out every other needle, and you can see this little tab that rides in the slot on the bed. And this one here on this side, it's a 1x2 and a 2x2 on this side. Okay, so I'm not going to do a very large swatch. Let's see, that's almost big enough to start. So I'm just going to pull out one more needle. So I'm going from about 20 left to 19 right. So on the river, I'm going to pull out every other needle as well, but, well, that's not it. I did that wrong. I want the alternating needles this time. So that's those. And then one more. Okay. Oh, I'm going to unthread my machine, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring my carriage across and then back again, and that puts the needles into working position. So now we already have everything set up because we did that, right? So I'm going to knit across, and I should get a nice zigzag from knitter to river to knitter all the way. And there we go. So next we have to, I'm just going to push the carriage off to the side. So we have to put our cast on comb in. So we're going to pull the wire, and you really want to be sure you take care of that wire, because from what I understand, they're hard to replace. And you'll see I've colored the center pink. That just helps me line that up. Okay, so you pull it through from the bottom like that, or push it through from the bottom like that, and then you stick your wire in. See, nothing to it. This part is actually the easy part. It's always the carriage settings where I get. Okay, so your river should have come with weights, right? Small one, large one. Each of my machines came with 3 large and 2 small. So for this, I'm going to use 2 large. And on my cast on comb, there are some holes, and I'm going to hang one from each side. So just outside of my section of knitting. Okay, so if we were looking at the operation manual, which you know what, let's just pull it out. Make sure I have it so you can see it. So if we look, we started out, we did everything in row 1. We set our needles according to row 2, and we knit across from the left to the right, and then we put our cast on comb and our weights. So now in row 4, it tells us that we're going to change a setting on the river carriage. So we're going to change what is called the set lever. So we're going to change the left set lever from 1 to 0. So that's that little switch on the front of your river carriage. And I will try to pause when I go by. It's so hard to move the camera. And then, so what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that on the next pass, only the knit carriage is going to knit. The river carriage is not, and that's how we want it to go. Okay? So there we go. We've only knit on the main bed. We have not knit the river. So now, if we look at the operation table again, we see that we're going to leave that as it is because it doesn't indicate a change, but we're going to set the cam lever on our knit carriage, so that's this part here. We're going to set it to slip. So that way, on our next pass, now remember, the river is still knitting when it goes to the right, but we want to make it so that only the river knits going to the right. We want to make it so that the knit carriage does not. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Change that setting. I'm going to bring it across. So, and there we go. That's exactly what we wanted it to do. So now when we go back to the left, we do want the knit carriage to knit. So we're going to leave the river carriage set so it does not knit, and we're going to change the cam lever on the knit carriage back to stockinette and across. Okay, so that means that now we are done casting on. Okay, so I'm going to change the stitch size to 5 on the river and on the knit carriage. Okay, and I'm going to change that switch back to 1. I want the carriage to knit. I want both carriages to knit in both directions. Now let's knit some ribbing. So sometimes the first pass or two is a little tricky because the tension of the stitches already formed is tight, and you've got the cast on comb in there too until it knits down a little further. Okay, so you want to check your end stitches and make sure they've knit. You see it's starting to get a little easier. And occasionally check those end needles. Actually, you kind of want to keep an eye on all of your needles as you knit, just to make sure that they are knitting. You know, especially when you're buying a used machine, say off of Marketplace, and you don't necessarily know the condition of the machine, you're just starting out with it. You know, it may be that you have a damaged needle and you just don't know. Okay, so there's some ribbing. Now, let's say, just for instance, see if I can find one. So say now I've decided that I want to switch over to stockinette. Now I think sometimes you get some holes, and there are certain little tricks that you do just to make it so that everything looks nice. But the basics of it are, you need these double-eyed needles, or transfer tools, needles. So you grab the hook on your river bed, you pull it up past the latch, down until the stitch is on your needle, and then you bring it up and onto the hook. So you would just do that all the way across. Now Brother machines, at least the standard Brother machines, not the mid gauge or the chunky, as far as I know anyway, they have a special carriage that will transfer stitches from your ribber bed to your main bed. And I have one, I just haven't had a chance to play with it yet. So maybe when I do the video for casting on with the Brother, I might play with that a little bit. But that said, I am the laziest person alive, and I don't find this too difficult of a task. Okay, snug those up. Just nice. Push all the rubber down. And I'm going to knit a couple rows. Just plain stockinette. Okay, so that's a little demonstration on doing the cast on using the instructions in the manual. So I am going to, I cut my yarn and I'm going to cast off, and then I'm going to show you how I really cast on. Or I'm just going to knit off. I'm not going to bind off or anything. Okay, so I'm going to support the ribber comb, partly because my toes are down there, and mostly because my flooring is down there, and it's not that old, and I really don't like dropping these big weights on it. Okay, so I'm just going to take the weights off, and then there is our ribbing, and you can see where we changed to stockinette. Yes, I have you in the camera. Okay, so now I'm going to take this out. I don't really have to take it out all the way. We'll take that out of the comb, and then we'll talk about the elephant I just brought in the room, and that is, so when you cast on one by one like this, you get this ruffled edge. So there's a few ways to avoid that. One of the biggest ones is you would cast on waste yarn, and then you knit a row with ravel cord, and then you go through the same cast on procedure with your yarn that you're going to be using for your project. That way the cast on comb is attached to your waste yarn, so your knitting with the waste yarn is the part that gets stretched out and gets this ruffled effect, not your project. Okay, so I realized that was a very long video and possibly boring, and maybe I went into a lot of detail. And I get that, but then I also get that sometimes people need that, right? Like if you're struggling to figure out how your machine works, you need that level of detail. So what I'm going to do now, we'll bring out one more, maybe not, is I am going to show you how I really cast on, because it's not the zigzag. I do not care for that cast on at all. And okay, so I have my needles cast on, and I have my carriage on the right, and I have my yarn threaded down to the left. And that's really the only way it works because of the way the yarn goes into the carriage. Okay, so this is how I actually would cast on if I was casting on ribbing. So for the knitter, you wrap counterclockwise, and then the ribber needle gets a clockwise wrap. Counterclockwise, clockwise. Counterclockwise, and every so often just let go of your yarn. Because then the tension mast helps you keep this cast on loops uniform. Make sure you don't make it too tight. And that you don't accidentally loop a gate peg, because those don't knit. Okay, and after the last stitch, bring your yarn over to your carriage. Be sure to draw up any slack until the first needles bite, so you don't get a loop. And there we go. So we have our zigzag And then we do our cast on. Excuse me, our cast on comb, the same as before, except see I have a loop there. And that can't, oh, let's see, what's my starting thread? Okay. Let's just come in from this way. Okay. And we hang our weights just as we did before. Balance to each end. And there's nothing to change on the carriage. This is why I like this cast on method the best, is because you don't have all of the carriage settings to deal with. It's basically set the same for your cast on as it is for your knitting, and there's less for me to mess up, because the other way I mess up all the time. So then we just knit our ribbing back and forth. You still keep an eye on your needles, make sure your stitches are forming. Okay, so we got some fabric there that we can look at. So I'm just going to cut the yarn, stick it in the mast, and I'm going to support the cast on comb so it doesn't fall on the floor. And I'm going to knit this off. Now, on a 1x1 rib, you're still going to have a bit of ruffle. Oops. But you can see that makes a much nicer edge than the other cast on method in the book. So not only is it easier and more straightforward, it gives a better result. Like, look at how nice that edge is. Okay. So there you go, side by side. So which cast on do you like better? So that's all. That's casting on with a Singer knitting machine and ribber. That's just 1x1 rib. Of course, there's many other options to try. 2x2 industrial, 1x2 English rib. You know, there's all kinds of ribbing that you can do with this machine. And that's that. Anyway, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.